two deaths on Everest in the same climbing season. One is reported everywhere, the other almost buried under silence. Why? What if I told you that in 2025, a climber's body was left on the slopes of Everest, his story distorted, misreported, or simply erased by the very media that should have told the truth? Tonight, we're not just talking about another statistic in the death zone. We're talking about a man with a name, a life, and a dream. Someone who became the second death on Mount Everest in 2025, but whose tragedy was hidden beneath headlines that never reached you. Was it negligence, a cover-up, or something darker that the climbing industry doesn't want the world to see? This isn't just a story about the mountain. It's about the cracks in an industry worth millions, the silence of those who witnessed, and the haunting mystery of why one climber's fate was erased. Stay with me, because once you hear what really happened up there, you'll never look at Everest or the people who profit from it the same way again. His name was Daniel Cole, a 34-year-old British climber from Manchester. Not a celebrity mountaineer, not a record chaser, not a millionaire buying glory with oxygen and Sherpa support. Daniel was different. He worked as a paramedic for the National Health Service. Years spent saving lives, rushing into chaos and holding the hands of strangers in their final breaths. Friends described him as quiet, stubbornly determined, and impossible to discourage. But Everest had been his dream since childhood. He first saw it in a school atlas, a sharp white triangle rising above the world. As a boy, he taped a photo of Everest above his bed. At 12, he told his father, "One day, I'll stand on top of that mountain." His father smiled, but never thought his son meant it literally. For years, Daniel trained quietly. He climbed Snowdon, Ben Nevis, the Scottish Highlands in winter. Later, the Alps, Mont Blanc, Matterhorn. He wasn't fast, he wasn't flashy, but he was consistent. Every year he saved money from his modest salary, skipping holidays, skipping luxuries, pouring it all into gear and expeditions. By 2023, he'd already climbed Cho Oyu, the sixth highest mountain in the world, without bottled oxygen. It wasn't Everest, but it was proof. Daniel wasn't just dreaming, he was capable. When he announced his Everest attempt for spring 2025, his colleagues were split. Some admired his courage, others called him reckless. "Why risk your life after spending years saving others?" they asked. Daniel's reply was simple: "Because this dream is part of who I am." In early April 2025, Daniel landed in Kathmandu. The city was buzzing with climbers from around the world, chasing the brief 2-month window when the mountain opens its doors. That year was particularly crowded. Nearly 500 permits had been issued, a circus of ambitions, egos, and business deals. Daniel didn't fit the usual mold. He joined a mid-sized expedition led by a reputable company. Most of his teammates were wealthy clients: a businessman from Dubai, a software engineer from California, a retired banker from Japan. Daniel, in contrast, carried gear that was patched and worn. He was climbing on a tight budget, relying on his own fitness and experience more than luxury logistics. In base camp at 5,364 meters, Daniel stood before the Khumbu icefall for the first time. Towering seracs glistened under the sun, blue crevasses groaned, ladders spanned bottomless voids. Guides called it a living monster, always shifting, always threatening. At night, Daniel wrote in his journal, "April 18th, base camp feels like another world. Helicopters buzzing, climbers in neon jackets, the smell of incense and kerosene mixing with yak dung. Everest looks beautiful, but also cruel. Everyone is smiling, but I see fear in their eyes, including mine." Acclimatization rotations began. Climbers went up through the icefall to Camp 1, then higher to Camp 2 at 6,400 meters. Daniel moved cautiously, methodically but steadily. His training as a paramedic made him sensitive to the smallest signs of altitude sickness. While others pushed recklessly, Daniel stopped to check his oxygen saturation, his hydration, his teammates' symptoms. By May 1st, he had reached Camp 3 on the Lhotse face. Thin air scraped at his lungs, and frost-bitten winds lashed his face, but Daniel held steady. Sherpas respected him for carrying much of his own load, rare among foreign climbers. He wasn't here to be carried. At night, the mountain howled. Tents flapped like fragile skin, Avalanches thundered in the distance. And yet, Daniel wrote calmly, May 3, I feel ready. Nervous, yes, but strong. I didn't come here to be a tourist. I came here to climb. Dad, if you ever read this, know that your son kept his promise. But Everest in 2025 was already marked by death. On May 6th, news broke that a 52-year-old climber from South Korea had died above Camp 4. Exhaustion, high-altitude pulmonary edema, perhaps both. That was the first death of the season. His name was in every headline. Photos circulated on social media, sparking debates about the dangers of overcrowding and the ethics of commercial expeditions. Daniel read the news at Camp 2. He didn't know the man, but he felt the weight of it. One death makes everyone nervous, he told a teammate. It reminds us that the mountain doesn't care who you are. Little did Daniel know, within days he would become the second. By mid-May, the weather window opened. Forecasts promised 3 clear days, May 16th, 17, and 18. Teams rushed to position themselves at Camp 4, the final staging ground at 8,000 meters, inside the infamous death zone. Daniel's group planned to summit on May 17th. He left Camp 3 on May 15th, fighting exhaustion with each step. The Lhotse face was a sheet of blue ice, and fixed ropes trembled under dozens of climbers. Traffic jam, the nightmare word of Everest. By the time they reached the South Col, winds had picked up. Oxygen bottles hissed in the freezing night, while headlamps dotted the darkness like stars scattered across black ice. Daniel tucked into his tent, shivering but resolute. May 16th. Tomorrow night we go. I don't know if I'll make it, but I'll try. I can hear the wind screaming outside. It sounds like the mountain is warning us. Maybe I'm just tired. I'll close my eyes now. Big day ahead. On May 17th at 9 p.m., Daniel clipped into the fixed lines with his team. The air was 35 degrees Celsius, oxygen at 1/3 sea level. Step by step, they moved upward. Balcony, South Summit, the Hillary Step. Above them, the true summit waited, the dream of a lifetime, and the edge of survival. But somewhere near the South Summit, something went wrong. Witnesses would later give conflicting accounts. Some said Daniel slowed, gasping, refusing to turn back. Others claimed his oxygen regulator malfunctioned. A Sherpa reportedly begged him to descend, but Daniel shook his head. At 6:10 a.m., a photograph captured him, standing alone, slumped near the summit ridge, head bowed as if in prayer. That was the last clear sighting of Daniel Cole alive. At 8,148 meters, the summit of Everest should have been the end of Daniel's journey, the fulfillment of a childhood dream. But instead, it became the stage for confusion, contradictions, and silence. When his team returned to Camp 4, Daniel was not with them. His tent remained empty. Teammates mumbled half-answers. He slowed down. He said he'd catch up. We thought he turned back. But no one saw him descend. No one clearly admitted to leaving him behind. In high-altitude climbing, such tragedies are sadly common. The summit fever, the desperate push for the top, often blinds climbers to their teammates' suffering. And yet, what happened with Daniel was unusual. Not just the fact of his death, but the way the story was handled. Accounts began to surface on May 18th. A Sherpa from another team swore he saw Daniel collapse near the Hillary Step. A climber from Spain claimed he passed Daniel, still breathing, but too weak to move. I thought his team was helping him, he later told reporters, but when I looked back he was alone. Others insisted Daniel made the summit, even briefly. There was a man standing on top, holding a small flag, said one Chinese climber. He looked exhausted, and he didn't stay long. I think it was him. The truth was lost in the thin air of Everest. Photos from that morning showed dozens of climbers on the ridge, but Daniel's face was blurred by goggles, masks, frost. Was he among them? Or did he fall just short? When news reached base camp that Daniel was missing, questions spread quickly. His expedition company released a brief statement. We regret to announce the loss of British climber Daniel Cole during the summit push. Our team did everything possible, but conditions prevented a safe recovery. And that was it. No details, no timeline, no acknowledgement of what truly happened. Other climbers whispered about arguments at Camp 4. Some said Daniel wanted to continue when guides urged retreat. Others suggested his oxygen malfunctioned, but no spare was offered. Sherpas refused to comment. Daniel's teammates declined interviews. The official version was silence. On May 19th, international outlets reported one death, the South Korean climber earlier in the season. His story went viral, but Daniel's? Barely a mention. A few British newspapers ran short notes, but no photos, no background, no investigation. Why? One reason, some speculated, was money. The expedition company sponsoring Daniel also managed several wealthy clients whose successful summits were celebrated. A public scandal could tarnish their reputation and cost millions in future business. Another reason was distraction. On May 18th, a viral video showed a queue of climbers stuck on the Hillary step, oxygen running low. Media latched onto that story, ignoring Daniel's quiet tragedy. But to Daniel's family, silence felt like betrayal. Back in Manchester, Daniel's father, Richard Cole, received the news in a phone call that shattered his world. His son, the boy who once taped Everest above his bed, was gone. Richard expected headlines, coverage, answers. Instead, he found emptiness. "It was like my son never existed," he told a local reporter weeks later. "They write about Everest deaths all the time, but not him. Why? Was he less important because he wasn't rich or famous?" He tried to contact the expedition company. They gave him vague reassurances. It was sudden, he didn't suffer, the mountain took him. But when he pressed for details, emails went unanswered. Richard turned to other climbers for answers. Some quietly admitted they'd seen Daniel struggling, but they were reluctant to go on record. "It's bad for business," one said. "People don't want to book with a company linked to a death." Whispers began to circulate. Was Daniel's death intentionally downplayed? On climbing forums, some accused the company of negligence. Others suggested his body was moved or left in a place where it wouldn't be seen by clients. One theory claimed Daniel was pressured to give up his oxygen bottle to another climber in distress, a sacrifice that cost him his life. None of these claims were proven, but the lack of transparency only fueled suspicion. Meanwhile, social media buzzed with outrage. A viral post read, "Two climbers died on Everest in 2025. Only one made the news, the other was erased. Why?" Thousands shared it, demanding answers. Still, major outlets stayed quiet. By late May, as the season closed, Daniel's story was nearly forgotten. His body remained on the mountain, likely frozen near the south summit, another ghost among many. Climbers passed without stopping, without knowing his name. At base camp, celebration roared as successful climbers toasted champagne and posed with summit certificates. The world applauded their triumphs. Meanwhile, Richard Cole sat alone in Manchester, staring at his son's climbing boots, wondering why his boy's death wasn't worth the truth. Everest had taken his son, but the silence that followed cut even deeper. And yet, silence never lasts forever. Because in the weeks ahead, small fragments of truth would begin to surface. Fragments that would reveal just how much the world hadn't been told. The mountain had changed. Up until this point, Daniel's climb had been brutal, but manageable. Now, everything shifted. By May 25th, the jet stream descended lower than expected, whipping the upper slopes with hurricane-force gusts. Visibility dropped to almost nothing, white walls of snow swirling like ghosts. Guides screamed into radios, climbers clung to fixed ropes as if their lives depended on them, and they did. Daniel was last seen by two climbers from a European team at around 8,300 meters. They said he looked exhausted but determined, moving slowly toward the south summit. His oxygen cylinder was running low, but he had a spare. The problem was, when he reached into his pack, that spare was gone. Later investigations suggested it may have fallen during the chaos of clipping and unclipping ropes. Without backup oxygen, the human body at that altitude is a candle burning at both ends. By late afternoon, Daniel sent his final radio call to base camp. His words were broken, fragmented by static. I'm close. Summit. Snow too strong. Can't see. Those were the last signals anyone heard. At around the same time, other climbers reported seeing a figure slumped near the Hillary step. Some thought it was a resting climber. Others believed it was Daniel, already on the edge of consciousness. But in the whiteout, no one could confirm. And in the death zone, stopping too long for another person often means signing your own death warrant. That night, wind screamed at 100 miles per hour. Radios fell silent. Daniel's tracker stopped transmitting just before midnight. The next morning, teams descending from the summit reported grim news. A body, partially buried in spindrift snow, lying off the main route between the South Summit and the Hillary Step. They didn't stop. They couldn't. Oxygen was running out, and survival demanded retreat. Back at base camp, Daniel's family and supporters begged for clarity. Who had seen him last? Could a rescue be launched? But every guide knew the truth. Once a climber goes down in that zone, the chances of survival are less than 1%. Still, the silence around his death felt chilling. While the first climber's death of the 2025 season was plastered across every news outlet, Daniel's story was already fading, overshadowed, misreported, or deliberately left untold. And that raised questions. Some climbers whispered that his guiding company didn't want bad publicity, especially after promising his family a safe and supported climb. Others suggested the media focused on the first death because it involved a more prominent, wealthy climber from a Western nation, while Daniel, a software engineer with limited sponsorships, didn't sell headlines. But there were darker theories too. That he'd radioed something else, something that never made it into official logs. That what he saw near the summit wasn't just blinding snow, but evidence of negligence or even sabotage. Whatever the truth, by the time his family finally received confirmation of his death, his body was already being referred to by a chilling phrase used on Everest: a landmark. Daniel had become part of the mountain, a point future climbers would pass, a reminder carved in ice, and a question mark left hanging in thin air. The news of Daniel's death reached the world not with a roar, but with a whisper. On May 28th, 3 days after his final radio call, a short statement appeared on a few climbing blogs. Second fatality on Everest this season, identified as Daniel Hayes, 34, from Colorado, USA. That was it. No headlines on major outlets, no documentaries, no global attention. Compare that to the first death of the 2025 season, a wealthy European climber whose passing was broadcast worldwide, with interviews, glossy images, and endless debate about Everest's dangers. Daniel's name, meanwhile, slipped into obscurity. At base camp, his teammates mourned quietly. They spoke of a man who had carried extra gear for others, who had shared his last chocolate bar on the Lhotse face, who had smiled even through the altitude headaches. But outside that frozen valley, the world seemed to move on without him. Daniel's family refused to let it go. His sister, Emily Hayes, began posting on social media. Why is no one talking about my brother? Why is the media silent? Why does the guiding company refuse to release his last radio transmissions? Her posts went viral within climbing forums. Soon, a few independent journalists started digging. What they found was disturbing. First, inconsistencies in reports. Some climbers claimed Daniel was last seen below the South Summit. Others swore they passed him above the Hillary Step. The guiding company's official statement placed him in a vague, high camp region with no specifics. Second, the oxygen cylinder issue. Why was his spare missing? Fellow climbers noted that oxygen bottles are often swapped, borrowed, or even stolen in the chaos above 8,000 meters. Could someone have taken Daniel's? If so, was it negligence or survival at his expense? Third, the silence in the press. Emails obtained later suggested that the guiding company had actively discouraged coverage, arguing it would damage client confidence. Some major outlets admitted they had chosen not to pursue the story because Daniel was not a public figure. To Emily, it was betrayal layered on tragedy. Her brother had not only died on the mountain, he had been erased from it. Weeks later, a few climbers descending from K2 shared another unsettling detail. Daniel E.'s final radio message may have been censored. A Sherpa at Camp 2 overheard base camp operators discussing fragments of his call. Not just storm, something wrong, people not helping. These words never appeared in the official logs. Suddenly, whispers of a cover-up spread. Was Daniel abandoned? Did his team leave him when he faltered? Was the company protecting their brand at the cost of truth? Meanwhile, the mountain moved on. Climbers continued to chase the summit, passing Daniel's frozen form, now half buried in rime ice. Some placed a glove or a flower beside him. Others looked away. On Everest, death becomes landscape. But to those who knew Daniel, he was not a landmark. He was a man, a brother, a dreamer who had saved for years, only to vanish in a silence louder than any storm. And that silence, manufactured, deliberate, was the real tragedy. Months passed. By late summer, Everest was quiet again, its slopes emptied of climbers, its winds reclaiming the silence. But the questions about Daniel Hayes did not fade. Emily pressed harder. Through persistent requests, she finally obtained fragments of Daniel's radio transmissions. The official transcript ended abruptly after, "Snow too strong, can't see," but leaked notes from a Sherpa liaison officer contained 2 additional chilling words, "No help." Those words struck like lightning. If true, it meant Daniel died not only because of the storm, but because others around him chose survival over solidarity. And while that brutal choice is a reality on Everest, the deliberate omission of those words proved something more. Someone wanted the truth, buried. The twist wasn't the storm. It wasn't even Daniel's tragic fall into silence. The twist was the quiet machinery of control, the way money, image, and industry power can erase a man's voice. Emily later wrote in an open letter, "My brother may lie on Everest, but his story will not be buried there. He deserves to be remembered, not as a statistic, not as a forgotten climber, but as proof that even the world's highest peak cannot hide the truth forever." Her words caught fire online. Slowly, Daniel's story began spreading beyond climbing forums, into mainstream outlets, podcasts, documentaries in the making. His frozen body might remain on Everest, but his voice, silenced in May 2025, began echoing louder than ever. And that's why we tell this story today. Not just for Daniel, but for every climber whose truth has been lost in the thin air above 8,000 meters. So, what do you believe? Was Daniel simply a victim of the mountain? Or was he also a victim of silence, negligence, and greed? One thing is certain. Everest doesn't just take lives, it tests humanity. And sometimes, humanity fails. If you want more untold stories like this, subscribe to Ben's Stories. Hit that bell icon because the next time we uncovering another mystery on the world's deadliest peaks, and you don't want to miss it.